He's an amazing storyteller, and you are really going to enjoy this. I know I am. So I think without further ado, let's listen to the pro.
Thank you. I hope I'm going to live up to the storytelling, but my kids say I never stop talking, so I've got lots of practice. Storytelling is an ancient art. Blind people, we're the internet. We are the internet, the magazines, the television, the radio, all of that. Before all of that existed, right? I mean, if you lived in a community and you had no other communication devices, not even books for many communities and for many cultures, you depended on the storyteller. And who made the best storyteller but the blind person? So their role was to collect up the stories, remember them accurately, and tell them, because the stories contained the myths and the legends and the traditions and the values. And that's how the culture was passed along. So I got to meet a bunch of storytellers in my trips into the Arctic. I started going up there in 1988, and I met a wonderful Inuit, a blind Inuit man, and a blind Dene native, and other people that taught me how to tell stories. I was able to record their stories and meet many other people. So almost like first contact. We all hear stories about first contact, the first explorers to touch this island and plant a flag here, and pick up a rock there, and be hit with an arrow from an angry native reception or something. But for me, the first contact really counts when we really started impacting their cultures. And that wasn't that long ago. I met people that were alive before we showed up and really started turning things around on them, like giving out welfare and food and setting up Hudson Bay stores and introducing things like guns and axes, alcohol, snowmobiles, all sorts of things that they never had in their lives that changed their lives radically. Even jobs, right? Even a job changed their life radically. So we're going to start in no particular order, but we're going to go travel around. Inuvik is the capital of the Northwest Territories in my mind, even though Yellowknife is. Inuvik is really an amazing city in the Northwest Territories, not quite in the Arctic, but hey, that's just a line across the top of Canada. To me, anything in the far north is really kind of the Arctic, and especially if you're above the tree line. We're going to go to the Yukon Whitehorse, Dawson in the Yukon, and Iqaluit. We're also going up to Tuktoyaktuk, right on the coast of the Arctic Ocean, and Klavik on the other side of the Mackenzie River Delta, and then over to the Eastern Arctic, which really, that was even later in terms of contact and bringing the new age technologies to the Eastern Arctic came much later, because most of the development and the military, all the satellites and the interceptions of planes during the Second World War and the air bases, that was all in the Western Arctic and Alaska. Eastern Arctic was more or less untouched for a lot of reasons. And so we're going to go to Iqaluit. That's the capital of Nunavut. Nunavut's not a territory. It's not a province. It's its own place, but it's still part of Canada. We're going to go to Pengnartung, which is a part of Baffin Island on the same island that Iqaluit's on. So we'll be traveling to all these different places and meeting people and hearing stories from these different places. The picture here is a red boat. That is a traditional whale hunting boat. This one is not made out of skin. Normally the boats would be made out of skin. This one is made out of plywood. They had plywood. It was handier. But could you imagine, 5 or 6 Inuit hunters going out in this plywood boat? And I'm telling you, the sides of the boats were maybe 3/8 of an inch thick, like just over a centimeter thick. You could punch your fist through it. And they would go out on the ocean with their homemade spears, and they would kill large whales and bring them back to the shore before they sank. So they couldn't just wait around. You had to spear it, chase it down, and drag it back to land before it disappeared beneath the waves. And then you could feed your family for a year. Not only your family, the whole community. So there was a lot riding on these Inuit hunters to get out there and get the job done. There was no room for fear or cowardice. Your family, the community depended on you. Next slide, Ian. So here we are. We're in Inuvik. This is the Mackenzie Valley Delta. You can see from these pictures, there's a lot of islands. The river flows north. All the rivers in Western Canada flow north. right? We're used to everything flowing south into the St. Lawrence River and out into the ocean. Everything west of, Thunder Bay flows north into the Arctic Ocean. And the Mackenzie River is one of these major rivers that flows north. There's an archipelago, the Mackenzie archipelago, and it's full of islands, and these islands shift around. I was taking a boat across the archipelago with an Inuit guide, and we were going to go visit Iqaluit, and he was showing me on the GPS. He said, look, he said, I don't use the GPS because it shows you where you are on the map using the GPS, but half the time he says it shows us we're in open water, but there's an island here. There's an island, used to be an island. So we'd be driving across islands in the boat, islands that no longer existed. And just as he's telling me this, the boat just starts sliding to a stop. And the water is so thick with silt in the summertime, you can't see down 2 inches. Well, we slid up on a mud flat in the middle of nowhere, probably 3 hours from Inuvik and another 3 hours to go to get to Iqaluit. And we've already witnessed bears and cougars, swimming across to islands and climbing out, and eagles. And we knew we were in the middle of nowhere. And so he got out and he found the deep water, and I said, give me a paddle. And I went on to the bow and I pushed and he pulled, and he was in the water and I was pushing with the paddle off the mud, and we managed to free up that 20-foot boat with the 6 of us on board and get it into deep water and get the motor going again and finish the ride. But that was, and then we came back by a small plane. That's how I got those pictures. But that was, that valley, that Mackenzie Valley, it also stretches the boreal forest north. So if you look east or west, there would be no forest. You're into the tundra, where there's too cold, the summers are too short to grow trees. But because this valley is wet, it's low, the water keeps a little bit warmer, the tree line bulges north in the Mackenzie Delta, almost right up to the Arctic Ocean. Next slide, Ian. Here's what we call some townhouses. Now, the locals call these the Smarty boxes because of their colors. This is in Inuvik. Why are they so tall? Well, you probably heard about permafrost, right? Permafrost is the ground, the first 6 feet, 9 feet of earth from the top down, digging down, is just frozen ground. The water in the soil is frozen solid. It never melts. Maybe the top 6 inches or so melts. But what happens if you build a house right on top of that? The house is warm. Over 2 or 3 years, the house melts the ground underneath. It turns into more of a liquid mud, and then the house just starts sinking and tipping and ripping apart. So what they have to do is they have to drive pylons into the ground, build the houses up about 8, 9, 10 feet, 2 or 3 meters above ground level, and then the heat from the house itself doesn't get into the ground, so the houses can stay intact so they don't start tipping. Now, unfortunately, with climate change, some of this permafrost is starting to melt, and some of these houses are starting to tip and turn and twist. So it's posing some problems for sure. Next slide, Ian. The ulu. So these ulu knives are pretty cool, right? It's like a half moon sort of shaped knife. These were normally just rocks, right? Just rocks that were chipped and sharpened into these amazing tools that Inuit women used for cleaning animals, for scraping hides, for, in this case, just chopping up fish. We were having a celebratory dinner later that night, and this woman kindly allowed me to take her picture as she was cutting up some Arctic char. And they had a kettle drum that they were pounding inside at that celebration later on that night. It must have been 12 feet across, like 4 meters across, this ginormous drum they were pounding with this 5 foot, 6 foot long, 2 meter long drumstick. And my poor dog was just horrified. All he'd heard was boom, boom, boom. And he thought the world was coming to an end. He was howling. There's no way I could keep him in the celebration. So we had to leave. We missed all the dancing and everything. But, being blind, I wouldn't have seen it anyways. But I was enjoying the pounding and the music and the singing. And the food was amazing. All country food. They call it country food, is food caught up there. It's the wild food, the food they've lived on. And even to this day, the majority of people who live in the Arctic, the majority of their food is country food. Next slide, Ian. So land of the midnight sun, right? June 21st, summer solstice. Whoa, yeah, whatever. We think of that as, it's maybe a few minutes longer day down here than the day before, the day after. But up in the Arctic, it means a lot because that's the day where the sun never goes down. It doesn't just stay above you. It sort of spirals around and circles around and it comes close to the horizon and you think, oh, it's going to start getting dark soon. And then it just starts popping back up again. So I went fishing. And it was just the ice had just gone out 2 weeks before, so the pike had just finished spawning in these little bays and ponds and up these little rivers in the shallow water. They swam up there from the main river. They laid their eggs. They spawned the eggs. And then they were starting to come out. They were just collecting their energy, and that's the time to catch them. You got a 2 or 3 week window every spring where you can catch these fish in plentiful supply, because once they get back into the Mackenzie River and the river silts up after the ice breaks up, the water is so thick with silt, the fish can't see you, you can't see the fish, and there's good luck ever trying to catch one again. You think it's the land of plenty, but it's only the land of plenty for a very short period of time. You take when you can, and then you have no choice but to move on and try something else. So it's really seasonal, right? To live up there, it's really based on the seasons. But you hear stories about catching a pike with all their pointy teeth. And the next slide, Ian, we'll get that mouth shot there. And you see those teeth, right? A lot of sharp teeth. Literally, you could just put a pop can in the water and they would just hit it. They would hit anything. I wasn't even putting my hands in the water anymore, because even if I was just unhooking a fish and my lure was dangling a couple feet above the water off the end of my fishing rod, the pike, 10-pound pike, would be jumping out of the water trying to grab it. They're so hungry and they're so competitive. It's just ferocious, and there's fish everywhere, absolutely everywhere. We had quite an interesting night of day fishing, and the next slide, Ian, was. So this is these 9 fish we couldn't let go because they swallowed the lures. So even if we managed to get the lures out, they probably would have died. So we were allowed to keep 5 each, but my friend says, well, I think we should stop because we don't want to go over a limit. We had probably caught and released a number of fish. I don't even want to guess how many we caught, but these ones we kept because they were injured. So we were practicing, sustainable harvesting. The other thing we were doing is we were only using a single hook. A lot of those spoon lures and spinner lures have treble hooks, like 3-pointed hooks. We took those off and we put on single hooks, so just 1 point. And we also use barbless hooks because there's so many fish. The government there says, look, you only need 1 hook. It doesn't need to have a barb. If you want to catch a fish and let it go because it's not the right size, it's too big, it's a spawning female, you don't want to keep that. You want to make sure the big females go back because they're really, one big female can do 90% of the population building up there. You don't want to hurt them. So you pinch down the barbs, you use a single hook, and really you don't even have to lift them in the water. They just shake off right beside the boat, unless, of course, they swallow the entire lure. Next one, Mad Trapper, Ian. So this slide here, Mad Trapper is a famous story of trappers would go in the north. They would bring their traps with them, their leg hold traps. They would build a little cabin somewhere in the forest where they would claim a trap line. And they say, oh, I'm going to trap this stream. I'm going to lay out all my traps along this one river. So this is my territory. And everyone would agree on who's going to cover which territory. But you would have to travel quite a bit from the community to get to some ground that no one else had claimed. And then you would build a little cabin and you would spend the winter out there. And you lived by yourself with nothing except maybe some books. But if you didn't know how to read, you didn't have books either. You had no communications, nothing to distract you other than staring at your own hands and feet. Probably didn't even have a mirror. If you didn't like yourself, there's a good chance you would go, you would have a mental health breakdown. Now, the Mad Trapper was one of these. He shot an RCMP officer. There was a big hunt for him. And it's considered quite a fable of hunting down this Mad Trapper. It took 2 weeks to chase him down using all these RCMP officers on foot, on sled. They finally managed to corner him and shot him. And to me, it's tragic because if we think about that now, and this is clearly a man in mental health distress, and the fact that we memorialize this story as good conquering bad, good conquering evil, I think this story has to be, I'm not into like cultural changing cultural stories, but we need to look at the story in a new way. I mean, look at his little grave there. There's not much to it, but the story, you look it up and I'm sure you'll notice this story, or someone will tell this story in a different way. Like I just told it both ways. And I think there's some lessons here to be learned. Next door, slide in. So this is Tuktoyaktuk, and I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but this is a community built right on the coast of the Arctic Ocean. The Arctic Ocean covers the top of Canada. There's no land in the middle of the north. It's all just frozen ice, the Arctic Ocean. So if you walked across in the winter or went across in a boat, you would hit Russia on the other side. You would hit about 11 different countries that circle the Arctic Ocean at the top of the world. Canada is one of them, and the Arctic archipelago is above Canada, and some of the largest islands in the world are in the Arctic archipelago. So you think, Newfoundland is a big island? Yeah, it's one of the biggest ones in the world. PEI is one of the biggest ones in the world. Vancouver Island as well. And then all the other biggest islands are up in the Arctic, believe it or not. It's just, we have no idea how big the Arctic is. You just fly up there from Ottawa and it's 4 hours just straight north. Like you could fly from Ottawa to Vancouver, or you could fly from Ottawa to Iqaluit. Same amount of time. That just gives you an idea how big Canada is. So the other thing about Tuktoyaktuk, it's built on this gravel. And some of these pictures show roads, but the houses are just sort of spread out along the coast. Now the ocean is starting to rise a little bit. Now they're having to push the houses back because at some point they're going to be underwater. The ocean is rising and there's no way you can sort of shore that up. You just have to move them back. When I stayed up there my first time, I stayed with Sam Ratty, an Inuit hunter. He was blinded, and I won't get into how he got blind, but it was quite tragic. And we spent a number of days together. I flew in with a cargo plane, small cargo plane, just me and the pilot, a whole load of stuff, and landed. And then he left, and then this winter came, and he didn't come back. So I just stayed with Sam. I don't know, 4 days. And at one point, I said, Sam, we just sat in his house the whole time. I said, what's around here? And he goes, well, there's a Hudson's Bay store, Lawrence. I said, well, can we go there? And I didn't bring my dog with me. I left him back in Inuvik. They told me, don't bring your dog to Tuk or some of the smaller communities because there's so many huskies running around, and they'll see my dog, strange dog. They'll just want to fight it. And last thing you want is a guide dog that's all ripped up. So I had no white cane, no guide dog, anything. And Sam never did either. He had a husky tied up beside his house, and he had a hockey stick with the blade cut off. So I convinced him that we should just go check out the Hudson's Bay store. So he said, okay. So we leave his house. I'm holding his elbow. He's got his hockey stick. We're walking along. There's gravel a little bit. This was just before the snowstorm hit. So we're just walking along the gravel, crunch, crunch, crunch. And I hear this vehicle pull up beside us, the wheels on the gravel, and it pulls up beside us and stops. And the man says, Sam, where are you going? And Sam says, oh, I'm just taking my blind friend here to Hudson's Bay store. And he goes, Sam, you're heading out of town. You better get in the van. We were heading the totally wrong direction, heading off into the tundra. And who knows if that man hadn't spotted us, if we would ever have gotten back. But anyways, he brought us to the Hudson's Bay store. We're in the store. He's telling me this is where everyone gets their welfare checks. This is where, and then it just goes right to the cashier, and they pay off their credit, and then they load up with groceries again, bring them back. That's the one store. They get everything at that store. This was in 1988. And then we hear a gunshot go off, and a man comes running in. He goes, there's a whale in the bay. There's a small bay there next to the store. I don't know if you can see that in the picture. And next thing you know, everyone's running for their guns. And everyone's running out of the store, and people, and Sam and I run out, and I said, what are they doing? He goes, oh, they're going to shoot the whale. He said, the whales never come in this way. They said they're going to try to kill it. It's food. It's food. You know what? You take your opportunities when they come. And sure enough, we get outside, we hear 2 or 3 more shots, and then quiet. And I guess the whale went down. And whether they hit it or not, it's hard to say. But they never saw it again. So they're pretty sure the whale just left. That's what they're thinking. I don't know if they ever found it or whatever. It was a small bay, so it probably just left. But it was an opportunity missed, but they certainly never stopped trying. I mean, that was back when you hunted, when you had the opportunity. Sam told me this one story about him and his wife, they used to go to the dump near the oil exploration site where they could collect plywood left over from the oil explorers that were thinking about drilling holes into the Arctic Ocean and pumping oil out of there. It never did work out, but they left a lot of good garbage behind. And the Inuits are very good at recycling, very good at reusing. So he said they were on their way back in the truck. His wife was driving, and she goes, "Oh, look, caribou." And he said, "Stop, stop, stop." So they stopped, and he said, "Get the gun." And she goes, "Shoot them." He goes, "Huh?" And she said, "How many?" She says, "There's 6 of them." And he goes, "Shoot them all." And she goes, "Well, we don't need them all." And he goes, "Shoot them all." And he told me this story, and he said he couldn't understand why his wife would not. She wasn't Inuit. She was from Alberta, Edmonton, and she would not shoot all the caribou. And to him, you see caribou, you harvest caribou. Like you do not stop until you can't harvest anymore, until they're gone, until they run away, because the caribou came through twice a year. They would just migrate through. You harvested as many as you could because you wouldn't see them again for another 6 months. And if you were one short of what you needed to get you through the 6 months, there's a good chance someone would starve to death. And to him, it was absolutely ludicrous that she would not shoot them all. That's just it's a cultural difference in how we see and how they interpret technology and how we need to interpret technology. Look, we all hunted with spears and hooks and arrows and things like that and slings. Now we have much better technology. We all need to exercise a much greater level of responsibility. And those days of harvesting to your limit, those are days gone by. We can't do that anymore. We have to be much more careful and considered using science and using values passed on to us by our Indigenous friends. Next slide, Ian. So this is the Yukon. We're in the Yukon here. So I'm all over top of the Yukon River behind me there. The Yukon River is one of the longest rivers in North America. It's 3,190 kilometers long. It starts in the Northwest Territories, starts in British Columbia, flows through the Northwest Territories, through the Yukon, through Alaska, into the ocean, into the Arctic Ocean. The salmon that migrate up the Yukon River they'll swim about 2,500 kilometers. Can you imagine Chinook salmon swimming 2,500 kilometers in the spring to get up to their favorite spawning beds where they were hatched, to get back to where they started? Of course, they die when they get there after they spawn. So Alaska and Canada, Alaska is the United States. We have agreements on how many salmon have to pass through Alaska to get to the Yukon. But it's not good. For the last 2 or 3 years, no one's been harvesting salmon in Alaska or in the Yukon. No sport fishing, no recreational fishing, and the Inuit and Native bands up there and populations, they have not been harvesting either because the population is just so low. It's challenging for sure. Without fish, there's not a lot of jobs up there. There is some diamond mines and some gold mining. You probably may have watched on National Geographic television the Gold Rush TV show and Yukon Gold and things like that. So the Yukon has quite a history of gold, now diamond mines as well, and just not a lot, right? There's not a lot of opportunities to make money, but people still manage to thrive and survive. And Native people have been up there for over 10,000 years. Some say much longer than that. How they got there and where they went afterwards and who was there before them. Well, a lot of that is still being debated. I won't even go into that, but it's some fascinating stories there if you want to read up on that for sure. Next slide, Ian. So here's me. I got up there with a documentary crew. It was about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was 2018 actually, and they were having a festival where they brought a bunch of Native and Inuit boat builders came together under a big tent, and they all built their traditional boats, sealskin kayaks, moose hide rib boats, birch bark canoes, and this is a dugout, right? This is a big log that they chip out the middle, and they point the ends, and they make a boat out of a big hollow log. Why do they have all these different ways of building boats? You use what you got. If you live with big trees, you make a dugout. If you live near birch trees, and not big trees, because birch don't get that big, you use the branches and then to form the frame of the canoe, and then you cover it in birch bark because you got lots of that, and it's waterproof, and you can use the birch sap to seal the joints. If you're beyond the birch trees, above the tree line, you find wood that drifts up along the river, right? All the rivers flow north, so they carry wood with them, and you harvest that wood along the shore, and then you bend it, you steam it, you bend it, you tie the ends together with catgut, with sinew, and then you cover it with sealskin, and you make a kayak, or you cover it with moose hide. And we'll go to the next picture there, Ian. So here's an Inuit woman with her iron and a kettle, and she's boiling moose hides, and she's scraping the fat and the fur off the moose hides, and her partner is building a frame out of sticks, and they will put this moose hide, they will stretch the moose hide over the frame, and then they will relocate to their summer hunting ground. All the family, all the supplies into this boat made of sticks and moose hide, and they will go down the river towards the Arctic Ocean where the fish are, and they will catch fish, harvest berries, smoke, and pack it all away, and then come back up that fall to their wintering grounds with the caribou in the trees, in the shelter, and that moose hide boat is pretty much finished. At least the sticks will be. They'll hopefully keep the moose hide. They'll do something else with that, maybe make a tent out of it. Nothing lasts forever, but they'll always find some sort of new purpose for all of this. So there's just quite a lot of ingenuity that really just based on what's at hand. Absolutely amazing. And watching and helping this woman with her moose hide scraping, that was very smelly, very, very hard work. She had definitely the hardest job out of all of them. All the men were building with sticks and everything and chisels, and she had to do the hardest work. I tell you, the absolutely astonishing. Women in tradition, men did the hunting. They had to stay fit, maintain their energy, because they would go out for days at a time. It was important they had strength and energy. Women did a lot of the physical labor, moving, packing, gathering, cleaning, all of that stuff. It might not seem fair, but they had a reason for everything. Next slide, Ian. Sled dogs. So here's some puppies. Who wants a puppy? I went to, it's amazing, this whole idea of sled dogs. I'm not sure when dogs became part of the Inuit culture, when they managed to acquire dogs, but dogs very much played an important role in moving around. And for emergency food, when you ran out of food, you could always eat your dogs. And that happened. That happened for sure. But now it's a cultural thing. Very much important to have a dog, and it's a status symbol to have a strong dog. But these are not big dogs, and these are not purebreds either. We're not talking Alaskan, type dogs or the big curly tails. These are huskies, and huskies can be a combination of just about anything. They're always maybe 40, 50 pounds in size. You don't need a tall, long dog with long legs. You want something close to the ground that can tow like a little bugger. So I visited this one husky sled dog center. They had 150 dogs. 150. I said, well, who needs so many dogs? But apparently she was rescuing them. She didn't want to see any of them die, the owner, and people were dropping them off, and she couldn't sell any of them. She just made sure she didn't breed too many. She only had bred 1 or 2 females a year, just to replace some of the ones that were going. It still seemed like an astonishing amount of dogs, but she had a lot of tourists coming up to try these dogs. So I said, she had a fenced off area of about 5 acres fenced off, and otherwise each dog has its own box and its own chain and lives there all winter. And I said, where do they get their exercise? So we put them into the pen, a couple at a time, so they don't fight, and we let them run around in there. I said, well, let's bring a couple down. And she goes, well, I said, let me take 2. And she goes, no. She was really reluctant. So finally I convinced her I can do 1 in each hand. So I had 2 huskies, and they're both maybe 50 pounds, right? 20 inches at the shoulder. I stood on the gravel in my running shoes. I had a dog and 2 leashes, 1 in each hand, and literally they just pulled me along on my feet through the gravel. I could barely stay on my feet. I was just skidding along, and she was sort of guiding them over to the gate into the yard. We got them into the yard, and I let them go, and I was sweating. I was exhausted, and I said, well, 2 down, 148 to go. I can't imagine doing that all day, every day, but it's a job, it's a love for sure. Next slide, Ian. So here we are, the gold rush, right? 1897. Someone found gold up in Dawson in the Klondike River. Maybe there was 10, 12 people up there. They quickly laid stakes, claimed the land, got all sorts of gold, got out of there the next spring, got on a steamship down to San Francisco, walked off the ship with pounds and pounds of gold nuggets and gold dust. They were instant millionaires, and people went bananas. Just bananas. Everyone had to get to Dawson to get their hands on some of this gold. It went on for the next 2 or 3 years. There was a depression on at the time too. So a lot of people lost their jobs, and a lot of people just quit. They just hated their jobs, and they wanted to do this. They wanted to go up and get a stake and get rich. They just wanted to do it. So they had to. It turned out to be a real flow of humanity, and they were coming up through Edmonton over land. They came up by ship to the Alaska, and then over the mountains, and then down, and then they had to build themselves a wooden boat quickly, and then they had to float the boat down the Yukon River to get to Dawson. And by the time they got there, it was August, and they had to turn around and go home because they had no money, no food, no tent. Winter was coming. There was no place to stay, and they had done what they came to do, which is arrive in Alaska. I made it, write a letter home, I'm coming back. And many didn't make it. Many died. There was lots of thieves that set themselves up along the way, that picked their pockets, sold them bananas for nothing, and Diamond Tooth Gertie, who set up this huge dance hall, employed all sorts of women to dance and sing and dance with the miners and pick their pockets too, right? So so that tradition still goes on. They kept the dance hall there, and they have a whole live show going on there. We got some pictures there, and the paddle wheelers for gambling. It was a lawless town. The RCMP was the first time they ever went up there, and they said, look, we'll take care of this. And they deployed some RCMP officers up there, and that basically laid claim to Canada in the far north and the far northwest. Otherwise, it might have been American. Next slide, Ian. So here's me with an Arctic grayling. So these are like, sunfish. We've all caught sunfish. This is the Arctic version of the sunfish. I say that because there's a lot of them. They're roughly the same sort of body shape. They're a little bit pie plate shaped, but these have wings, and they're like butterflies, and they're beautiful, and they're ferocious little fighters, and they're yummy to taste and eat. But a lot of people maybe catch a few up there just to make a snack, have a quick meal. But they're not the fish that most people harvest. They're just too beautiful. Most people let them go like I did. There's lake trout you can catch. 100-pound lake trout, it would be about 100 years old. The biggest lake trout get up to maybe 120 pounds, and they'll live to maybe 150 years old. They live that long because they grow so slowly. I mean, the lakes are only free of ice a couple months a year, and the rest of the time they're almost semi-dormant. So they're only growing maybe a half a centimeter a year. It takes them forever to grow up. And Arctic char, of course, are up there as well. And so that's it. Northern pike, lake trout, Arctic char, and these Arctic grayling. So we'll go to the next slide, Ian, Iqaluit. So Iqaluit, like I said, is the capital of Nunavut. This is a brand new self-governance agreement with the Inuit of the Arctic. They wanted their land. We had never done Canada had never done a sort of land settlement with them, a land claim, anything like that. So this is sort of, they said, okay, that's your land. All of the Eastern Arctic belongs to the Inuit, and it's called Nunavut. It's still part of Canada, but they run the whole show. And Iqaluit is their hometown, and they're staffing all the government jobs up there with Inuit people. There's about 24 communities in the area that are all Inuit communities. Many have different dialects. You have to go travel between plane or snowmobile in the winter, maybe ice roads in the winter. In the summer, the only way you get around is by plane to get from town to town, because there is not a lot of roads, right? If you have a car in Iqaluit, you can see there's a road there. Chances are the whole time you have the car there, you'll never get over 30 kilometers an hour. So if you have your car there for 4 years, you buy a car, it's delivered on a barge, you drive it around in Iqaluit for 4 years, then you get a job back in Ottawa, you don't bring the car back. Because if you bring the car back to Ottawa and you put it on the highway and you try to 120 kilometers an hour in a car that's never done more than 30 or 40 kilometers an hour for its entire existence, the motor just blows up. It just wasn't broken in to do that. It's a different world, absolutely. I met this one Inuit woman who transferred to Yellowknife for a great job, and the car came in later by barge, and her husband had a truck, so he drove down with her, and she could drive, but she only had ever driven in Tuktoyaktuk on those gravel roads there. And she said she got him behind the wheel, and she started driving through Yellowknife, population 10,000, one stoplight kind of thing. And she panicked. She said she got the walkie-talkie going, called her husband in front, and the truck said, pull over, pull over. She said it was just too much stimulation, with the traffic lights and the curb and the sidewalk and other cars, and it was just overwhelming her. It's just a totally different experience for sure. And this was 10 years ago. So there's still a lot of change happening in the north. Next slide, gift of an Arctic char. This young woman came from Newfoundland. She married an Inuit hunter. They have a boy together. The marriage didn't last that long. Cultural differences, so I didn't ask. But she stayed. She raised her son as an Inuit hunter, and she built a bed and breakfast up there. And I often stay up there when I go up. And this woman is a real pioneer, absolute businesswoman, entrepreneur, get it done. So someone came on a snowmobile, an Inuit hunter. They were out trapping Arctic char through the ice, drilling holes, lowering nets, catching Arctic char, not to eat, but to feed their dogs. Because dog food, to bring up a bag of dog food by plane up into the Arctic is so expensive. I mean, we're paying $40 for a big bag of dog food here in Ottawa. Up there would be $150. When you can go out and catch a whole bunch of Arctic char for free, and then freeze them, which you just basically just go dig a hole in the ground, and they're going to be frozen in the permafrost, covered over so nothing can get to them. And you just chunk up this fish, just whack a chunk off and throw it to the dog, and he'll eat that. And but this hunter needed gas money for a snowmobile, so he gave her one of these Arctic char for $10 of gas money, and she gave it to me as a gift. I just wrapped it up in a garbage bag. It was frozen like a popsicle. Put it in my suitcase. It was still frozen when I got home, and we ate it. And you cannot live on Arctic char. They're very lean fish. If you tried to survive all winter long just eating Arctic char, you would starve to death because there's just not enough fat. Your fat reserves in your own body would slowly disappear, and you would just die. So it's a food, but it's not a food that can sustain. Hence, eating of narwhals, eating of belugas, eating of whales, eating of caribou and muskox and all the other animals that need, more high protein, high fat, rich diets that can get them through the winter. Pangnirtung. So this is another community on Baffin Island. A lot of Nunavut is on Baffin Island, and some is on the mainland of Canada in the far end of what used to be the Northwest Territories. It's the Eastern Arctic. So one of the communities on Baffin Island is Pangnirtung. It's a fjord, so a huge finger of water cuts into the side of the island and comes right up, and where that finger stops is this community of Pangnirtung. So I was there in November, and it was unusual that the ice hadn't started yet. Normally the ice is there for, they have 2 or 3 months a year of ice-free conditions and 8 or 9 months a year of frozen ocean where they can travel with snowmobiles, sleds, snowshoe, even cars on frozen roads. But with the climate change, the ice is becoming less stable. The ice pack in the Arctic is shrinking. The number of days of open water is extending every year. And all of that to say, Inuit are going commercial fishing. Now that the ice is off the ocean, it makes sense to get a boat, get some nets, get some fishing lines, and get out there and catch some fish. Fish that have never been fished before because of the ice are now being fished. And these are fish, like I said, in very cold water. They grow very slowly. So a lot of scientists are thinking, wow, you have to be careful. I met and talked to a lot of the Inuit fishers, and they said, look, we don't know. We've never done this. So we're counting on good science as well. I mean, they're handing out fishing quotas to the Inuit hunters to to go out and catch fish. We'll go to the next slide, Ian. You can, in this picture, I guess you could see they built an actual fish processing plant there in that white building. So the Arctic commercial fishery. So I met these Inuit fishers, and they told me it's too expensive to bring a fishing boat up. I mean, to pack a fishing boat onto a ship and then put it on a barge and then bring it to their community. I mean, that's a whole barge, just to haul a boat. So instead, they just bring up several sheets of flat aluminum, a skill saw, a tape measure, and a welder. And they just basically sketch out the pieces of the boat on the aluminum sheet. They cut it out with a skill saw, they bend it, and they weld it together with the welder. And that's what we're going out with there on that boat. That's a handmade aluminum boat, and they go out for 2 or 3 days at a time. They sleep on that boat. They'll put out fishing line that goes down about 400 meters below the surface, and they catch turbot on long lines, many hooks. They just stretch it out, maybe 5 kilometers of fishing line along the bottom, maybe 500 hooks baited up, and they just lay it down on the ground, and then they'll wait 12 hours, and then they'll reel the whole thing in, hook after hook after hook on this one main line, and hopefully by the time the winter comes and the ice comes, they've filled their quota of 20,000 or 30,000 pounds of turbot. These fish are cleaned, the heads are left on, the guts are taken out, they're flash frozen, and they're all shipped to China. The Chinese want the heads on. They want to see the eyes of the fish. The clarity of the eyes shows the quality of the fish, how long they've been sitting out. And the heads are a delicacy. They pay just as much for the heads as they do for the bodies. And Northwest Passage, Ian. So Ian's got some great Google Earth pictures here of the Arctic, and open water, a lot of open water, a lot of islands, a lot of these lines showing where the ships are now passing through the islands. I talked to a company, they have a tour boat business up there now. A family in Cape Breton, an Inuit man and a woman from Cape Breton. They started this company. They have beautiful ships. If you want to go through the Northwest Passage, it's $7,000 a person. It takes 3 weeks. It's one way, and then you fly home. The boats hold about 200 to 300 passengers and about 40 crew. It's very high end. It's not considered, 5-star, but it's an expensive vacation. But only 30% of the waters are mapped for navigation. 70% of the water is unmapped because it was been all under ice forever, right? So every so often, you hear one of these cruise boats just running aground on a shoal of rock and getting stuck and then starting to sink, but it just settles on the rock, and then they have to be rescued, and the ship has to be refloated and repaired. And it happens. But now we're having military vessels go through there. We're having freighters, because now they don't have to go all the way down to the bottom of South America and travel that way to get into the Pacific Ocean and over to Asia. They can just go over the top of Canada. So there's a lot of pressure to get that open, to make that happen. Franklin expedition, I'm sure you've all heard of that. They tried this, I think it was in the mid 1800s, with 2 ships, the Erebus and the Terror. They got stuck in the ice, and we never found their log books. I think they found some books now, but they only just found the ships about 3-4 years ago. Those ships were broken, sunk, and because some Inuit saw the mass of the ship sticking out through the ice, and no one ever asked them, hey, did you ever see any ships around here or where they might be? And finally they asked the right guy, and he said, oh yeah, they're in that bay. I'll take you over there. And they brought the searchers over in their search ship, with all their fancy radar and sonar and GPS. And one Inuit hunter just brought them around and said, there, it was right over there. And they looked, and sure enough, they found the first one, and it didn't take them long to find the second one. Totally preserved, all the artifacts in the boat. No people, though. The people tried to get home walking, and they never made it. 150 crew never made it, and they found signs of some of the crew. They never found Franklin or the officers, but they found a lot of signs of cannibalism and just pure panic and disorder. It's quite a tragic story, but it's makes for a very good read if you want to stay up night and be just amazed what people will do in the name of country, in the name of commerce. You know, go north, try it, go up there. You know, don't count on taking a job away from an Inuit or a Native person up in the north. I mean, those jobs are pretty precious and they want their jobs. But if you can bring some money up there, if you can bring some ideas, it brings some tourism, they're happy to see you. Just don't take one of their jobs. It's very costly to live up there. It's very expensive to fly up there. It's not, you know, going in out for dinner is a very expensive prospect as well. Everything has to be flown up. It costs a lot of money. But it's definitely something you want to experience, and you want to experience the people, the beauty, the stories, the culture, and because you know it's changed so much since I started going up there 30 years ago, and it's just going to keep changing. So you might think, well, it's all changed now. What's the point? No, it's changing faster now than it ever has with climate change and the shrinking ice pack and the rising ocean. And all of that. I mean, they're having forest fires up there now. Forest fires. Trees, it's no longer tundra. Now there's forest growing up there. Trees, full-size trees are growing up there now. It's all changing. Thank you very much.